What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. Today we have another hidden gems video for you, and today we're actually going to be covering 3-4 defensive ends here in Madden 21. 3-4 defensive ends that are going to help your team out and help improve your development, help improve your team's development over time, and could potentially help improve your team immediately. Now, the reason that we have decided to do 3-4 defensive ends is because I was going through this process considering making it an overall defensive ends video. 3-4 defensive ends, 4-3 defensive ends, but I just found that there are way too many players for me to make a single video on defensive ends. You know, being that there are left defensive ends and right defensive ends, and you have to include the fact that there are 4-3 and 3-4 defensive ends, there are just simply too many to pack into one video. So today we're going to talk about 3-4 defensive ends, or at least guys that can help your team as a 3-4 defensive end. So the first thing that I want to mention is that in this video I'm not going to go through all of these specific honorable mentions, and there's a reason for that. There are a ton of players out here that you could very easily take and turn into a valuable starter on your team that could be very productive. I mean, just simply in free agency alone, you have guys like Terrell Suggs, Jabal Sheard, Willie Henry, Breland Speaks, Anthony Zettel. These are all guys that you could take and plug into your lineup and have no problem whatsoever utilizing those players. But there is one specific honorable mention that I did want to cover in today's video, and that is going to be on the Cowboys. A player that I feel like is certainly deserving of a spot on here, but doesn't necessarily fit the description of a 3-4 or a 4-3 defensive end, and that's going to be Dorance Armstrong. So Dorance Armstrong really fits the bill more of a 4-3 defensive end. So it's kind of odd that he's a little bit lacking in speed, but his specialty is finesse moves and things like that. And so this is why he's on the honorable mention side of things today, is because I feel like he's a very valuable player that you could add to your team. You could probably bring him in for a reasonable price potentially. But he might struggle to do one thing or the other. It's going to take a lot of effort to turn him into what you want him to be. He's a good overall at a 71 overall and 23 years old, but like I said, he's not very fast, so you would tend to think he'd be a 3-4 defensive end, but he doesn't have the power moves and block shedding that would go along with a 3-4 defensive end. So that's why he finds himself in the honorable mentions category. Now, aside from that, we're going to jump right into all of the players, and the first player that we're going to talk about is actually going to be on the Bengals, and that is going to be Sam Hubbard. Sam Hubbard for me is a very obvious choice for this, and he's almost a player like Dorance Armstrong that does lack a little bit of speed, but he's a player that could very effectively play 3-4 or 4-3 defensive end. I would prefer to play him as a 3-4. He is coming over from the Bengals system, which does tend to, if I'm not mistaken, play 3-4 defense. So Sam Hubbard is certainly one of the top players on this list. We're actually going to go to the Browns next, so we're keeping it in the AFC North, and we're going to talk about Porter Gustin. Porter Gustin is a guy that you could probably look at his physical attributes and say he could play both ways, but he really has the skills that lend themselves to a 3-4 defensive end. With his good strength, but on top of that, good power moves, and you know, all of the guys that are on this list for the most part are going to be guys that have good strength, good power moves. Some of them probably a little bit slower, and that's what lends themselves to being a 3-4 defensive end. So make sure you guys go out and check these guys out whenever you're trying to improve your team, if you're trying to run a 3-4. So Porter Gustin is one. Just simply because of Myles Garrett being in front of him, and then the Olivier Vernon, Adrian Claiborne, rookies like Curtis Weaver being on the team, he is certainly going to be available, and you could probably pick him up for a reasonable price. The next player that's going to be on this list is actually going to be Zach Allen on the Cardinals. I like Zach Allen quite a bit, though he might be one of the tougher ones to get on this list. The reason that I think that he is kind of available is because of the drafting of Leki Fotu, and Leki Fotu essentially serves the same role. These guys are both prototypical 3-4 defensive ends, in my opinion. Slower but strong, good power moves, good block shedding, and so Zach Allen could be a productive player on this team, but if I was the Cardinals, I would want to be starting Leki Fotu or potentially moving Leki Fotu to the inside at D-tackle. In either case, I think Zach Allen could potentially be available there for you, and he's a very good player that you could take and plug into your starting lineup in a 3-4 defense, and you could see a reasonable amount of production out of him, and you might even be able to develop him into a very good player if you focused on it. The next player on this list, we're going to be jumping all the way to the Colts, is actually going to be Ben Banogu. I hope that I pronounced that correctly. Now, this is one that's a little bit interesting because Ben Banogu is a very fast player. So you could absolutely take him and play him as a 4-3 defensive end just purely on his speed alone. That would lend itself to him getting to the quarterback as an edge rusher. However, from a 3-4 defensive end perspective, he has reasonable strength to play at that position, and not only that, he has a better power move and a decent block shed. So Ben Banogu is a guy that I would certainly be looking out for, especially if you want a guy that is going to be versatile, and that is going to be a lot of the players that are on this list. Some of these players, you're going to see their name twice whenever I do the 4-3 list, because these players can be versatile. You can utilize them as a 3-4 or a 4-3 defensive end. You could probably utilize some guys like Banogu as an outside linebacker in a 3-4 system. So I like the versatility of guys like this, and you're going to see a lot of these guys on the list because these are the most, I don't want to say, what do I want to say? These are the most impactful hidden gem players that you could possibly find out there because you could utilize them in a number of ways. And as your team changes, as your team develops, if you need to plug in a spot, these are players that can plug in at those positions. So moving on from Banogu, we're actually going to talk about the Dolphins, and we're going to be talking about Christian Wilkins. Christian Wilkins is a very good player. This might be one of the harder gets out of anybody on this list because of the fact that he is probably one of the better defensive linemen, if not the best defensive lineman on this defense. But they have other players that can play across this defensive line. They just drafted Raekwon Davis, so if they want to run their 4-3, then they might be able to fit Christian Wilkins into the mix. But he is certainly potentially available, and I have to include him on this list because he is so good as a 3-4 defensive lineman that I just simply can't pass up putting him on this list, because if you can find a way to get him, if you can find a way to add him to your team, he will be a stud 3-4 defensive end for you for a very long time. And to add to that, that's one of the reasons that he's available, is because he's a 3-4 defensive end playing in a 4-3 system. Or, likewise, if the Dolphins, whoever's running the Dolphins decides to run a 3-4 to capitalize on Christian Wilkins' ability, then they have an odd man out at D-tackle between Godchaux and Raekwon Davis. And so they just have too many good defensive linemen, and they don't fit into the schemes. So Christian Wilkins is a player that you could potentially go out and grab and add to your team and help yourselves out quite a bit. Now, the Philadelphia Eagles is the next team that we're going to talk about, and we're going to be talking about Derek Barnett here. Derek Barnett is a really good 3-4 defensive end. He is very similar to Christian Wilkins, and I can't leave him off the list. And another reason that I think that he's available is because of how many players they have across the defensive line that could fill in that spot. Say you offered a good draft pick to the Philadelphia Eagles, I think they'd be hard pressed to turn down a good offer for Derek Barnett when they have so many other guys that could fill in that position and could successfully take over at that defensive end spot. And I think Derek Barnett would be a fantastic addition to anybody that's looking to bolster their defensive line. Now, the next player that I want to talk about is actually going to be on the same team, and that's Genard Avery. This is another reason why I feel like these two players could be available in Barnett and Avery, is because they have two players here that can perform the same role. Now, Genard Genard Avery is a player that can go both ways. But again, he's another player that skill set, his actual abilities, his pass rushing abilities and block shedding abilities lend themselves more to being a 3-4 defensive end. Now, the reason that I'm not, I guess I should have said this earlier, the reason that I'm not scrolling all the way over to their power moves is because this takes forever. But like I said, Genard Avery is a guy that I think can go both ways. He has a decent power move for what his overall is. Like I said, he's a guy that can go both ways with his speed and everything. He's probably more akin to a 4-3 defensive lineman. But again, these two are players that, if this team is looking to maximize what they can get back for, too many players across the defensive line, because you can never play this many defensive linemen. You can never kind of simulate what they do in real life, which is rotating defensive linemen constantly. If you're trying to capitalize on all of this capital that you have, your trade assets, the Eagles are going to be looking to get rid of one of these guys. Whether it's Derek Barnett or it's Genard Avery, you can get one of these guys and you can plug them into your lineup. And like I said, they can plug in that hole as a 3-4 defensive lineman very well. Now, the next player that I'm going to include on this list is what I would think to be one of the top obvious ones, and that is left end B.J. Hill off of the Giants. B.J. Hill just doesn't have a spot in this lineup behind young guys like Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams, and then at D-tackle Dalvin Tomlinson. B.J. Hill just doesn't have a spot here, and B.J. Hill's a guy that could play both 3-4 defensive end and D-tackle, so he really lends himself well to being a 3-4 defensive lineman. This is one of the top ones on my list, in my opinion, because he is very strong. He has really good power and block shed for what he is, and he's only 24 years old at a 75 overall. He's one that every franchise, if I can find a way to get my hands on him, I'm trying to add him because he is versatile across the defensive line like that, and he is a really, really good run stuffer. Now, the next one on this list is going to be Smoot off of the Jags. So if we look at, I don't want to pronounce this incorrectly, but I believe it's pronounced Dwayne Smoot, Dwan Smoot. I don't know how you pronounce it, but he's another player that he can kind of go both ways. I like the versatility of him. He is a decently sized player. He's a little bit on the smaller side, so like I said, probably going to lend himself more to the 4-3 defensive end, but he is good enough in various different areas that he could play 3-4 defensive end well. And this is a player that I would have no problem rotating around on my defense, especially as like a six-man type player, if you will, or a 12th man, I guess it would be. This is the type of player that I would stick in as maybe the backup for all of my defensive linemen and my outside linebackers, and just have him rotate in and get snaps whenever he possibly can. This is a guy that I think that you guys could add for a reasonable price because of what the Jaguars are doing over here with young guys like Josh Allen and Chasson out of LSU. Those guys are going to play, and a guy like Smoot just simply is not. So Smoot is a player that's probably going to be available for a reasonable price, and probably, honestly, one of the cheaper players on this list because he is 25 years old. So that's kind of at the top end of the range that we typically look at. The next player that I want to take a look at is actually Fudukasi off of the Jets, and I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, but another similar story, a guy that's just sitting behind Quinnen Williams and veteran guys like Henry Anderson. Fudukasi is 25 years old, so again, another player that is not being utilized necessarily as well as he could be, but with 90 strength, that's probably the highlight for me. This is a guy that's gonna lend himself more towards a D tackle in any situation, but could play the 3-4 defensive end spot pretty well. I mean, when I think about a guy like this, I think about a guy like maybe a Cam Hayward, more of a run stuffer type of player. So somebody that could certainly help your defense in that way. The next one is actually on the same team, and this is John Franklin Myers. John Franklin Myers is a guy that is, again, very strong, and for the same reasons that I listed above, with Quinton Williams being here, let's say they decide they want to hang on to Fatukasi, or however you pronounce it, then Franklin Myers might become available. Or let's say they want to hold on to Franklin Myers, then Fatukasi becomes available. They have so many guys here, and realistically, all three of these guys are effective at playing that defensive end role. So with that being said, personally speaking, I'd reach out to the Jets and try to acquire one of these guys, because they just have too many guys to be able to play, in my opinion. So certainly some good players for the Jets there that you could add to your team. The next one is probably one of my favorites, but is one of the more difficult ones to get, and that is Da'Shawn Hand off of the Lions. This is a player that is really good in Madden, and you can develop him into a really good player, but I feel like in real life he just kind of hasn't lived up to maybe what his expectation was, and that might go for the entire Lions defense, and for that matter, basically everybody on the Lions team. I apologize for the Lions fans out there, but the Lions defense just really hasn't lived up to expectations, especially with the coaching transitions and everything like that. Da'Shawn Hand is a player that they might be looking to move on from, especially with the drafting of rookie Julian Okwara, a more fast player. If they're looking to run a 4-3 style of defense, Okwara would be the obvious start there, and Da'Shawn Hand would be a player that you would obviously look to maybe move on from as a Lions owner, and Da'Shawn Hand is the prototypical 3-4 D tackle. DN. This is a guy that I look at as almost like a carbon copy of Stephon Tuitt of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Super strong, good power moves, good block shedding. That's exactly what you want as a 3-4 defensive end, and this is one of the guys that is very high on my list. Now the next guy is actually Austin Bryant. Very similar player. Lacks a little bit in the strength department, but one of these guys that's kind of a lower overall that you might be able to get for even cheaper. 23 years old, 67 overall, so a very good combination there. And this is a guy that you can kind of mold to be what you want. He's not already established in one particular skill set. He is more leaning towards a 3-4 defensive end, but you could pick this guy up and mold him into what you want him to be, and definitely has the ability to be a 3-4 defensive end. The next player that we're actually going to talk about is on the Patriots, and surprise, surprise, this one is Chase Winovich. Chase Winovich is more of a 4-3 defensive end, but we know that the Patriots run both 3-4 and 4-3 defenses. They run whatever it takes to stop the opposing teams. The Patriots are one of the most intelligent teams in the league, and they wouldn't have drafted a guy like Chase Winovich if they didn't feel like he could have a tremendous impact, and he has had a pretty good impact. So this is one that could be potentially difficult to get off of this team or take away from that team, but I really like the speed that he presents as well as his abilities. And I have to say, the people over there at EA are, from my understanding, big Patriots fans, or at least they respect, or maybe in my opinion overrate the Patriots quite often in Madden, in comparison to other teams. And Chase Winovich is a player that I feel very strongly behind the scenes is coded to play really, really, really good. Even though he's a 75 overall, this guy plays like he's an 85, maybe even a 90. I've taken him and plugged him into my lineup before, and he just gets sacks. He pressures the quarterback, he blows plays up in the backfield. He's a player that is, in my opinion, programmed to play better than most of the other players in the game, and so this is one that I would really be on the lookout for to try to add to my team, because this is one of the players that, personally speaking, I feel is coded behind the scenes to play better than other guys. The next one that I want to talk about is actually going to be on the Raiders, and this is going to be a player that is very similar, that I feel is coded to play really, really well behind the scenes, and that is Max Crosby. I can't offer an explanation for why he plays as well as he does, but this is probably one of my favorite gets, and this might be the top player on this list for me, is Max Crosby, because he is a 23-year-old, like I said. He's going to be hard to get, though. The Raiders are struggling to find the players that are going to really make an impact for them. And so, between guys like Clelin Ferrell, Arden Key, Max Crosby, guys that are expected to have an impact, Max Crosby, I think, has the most potential out of any of them. And this one's going to be the hardest sell for anybody that is the Raiders. But Max Crosby is a player, like I said, that if you can get your hands on him, is really, really effective and is coded to play really well in the game. But there are a couple other guys on this team that are also very good at that 3-4 defensive end role, and Clelin Ferrell is one that might surprise you guys. He kind of comes in as more of a 4-3 kind of scheme guy, but in Madden, his skill set lends him to being a 3-4 defensive end, as well as Arden Key. Arden Key is a guy that you might be able to get off this team. So, yeah, I hate to say like every player on this team is worthwhile, but I even considered Carl Nassib. Carl Nassib has been on this list in the past, but he's starting to age up there, and so I can't really consider him on this list anymore. But I really recommend you guys go out and get Max Crosby, Clelin Ferrell, Arden Key, any one of those guys if you can, because they will really add some value to your defense. And if you're the Raiders, obviously you got to hang on to these guys, but you might be able to fetch a decent price for them if you try to trade them away. The next guy I'm going to talk about is on the Rams. This is one of my favorite plug-and-play players, and this is Morgan Fox. He's not going to turn into anything amazing for you guys, but as a 3-4 guy, somebody that runs the 3-4 a lot, Morgan Fox is a fantastic plug-and-play player. He's a really good run stopper out of anything, and probably one of my top favorite plug-and-play type of players on this list. So I highly recommend you guys go out there and take a look for Morgan Fox. I try to pick him up every free agency because he's usually a free agent after the first year, and I try to go out and grab him and add him as depth to my team because he, improves your run stuffing game quite a bit, to be honest with you guys. The next guy on this list is actually going to be Hendrickson off of the Saints. So where's he at? Right end, Trey Hendrickson. This is another team that has just a ton of talent at D-line, between Marcus Davenport, Cameron Jordan, and their D tackles, which they have like 7 of that are viable. Trey Hendrickson is a guy that you can absolutely get off this team for the right price, and at 25 years old, 74 overall, he's got a really good skill set between his speed, his strength, and his agility. This is a guy that you're going to see on both lists. This might be one of the most available guys because of how much talent the Saints have at D-line, at least in the game, and so highly recommend you guys check out Trey Hendrickson if you're looking for a player and you're trying to get one for a reasonable price. And then the next one that I like quite a bit is actually on the Seahawks, and I've mentioned him before, and you guys have probably heard about him in multiple videos because of how good he can be, and that is Rasheem Green. Rasheem Green is 23 years old, 68 overall, 81 speed, 80 strength, 76 agility, 86 acceleration. He's a guy that is just physically capable to do anything you want him to do. He's one of my favorites because of how low of an overall he is, so you can usually get him for a good price. Sometimes he's out there in free agency because this team just cuts him. Sometimes he gets placed on the practice squad. So he is generally available, and he's there for the pickings. So Rasheem Green, keep on the lookout for that name because that's going to be one that you guys really want to keep an eye on. And then the last player is actually out in free agency, and that's going to be Sharif Finch that came out of Temple. He's actually actually, I don't know what team he came from, but he's a free agent. Sharif Finch comes in as a 68 overall. I like his combination of speed and strength. Typically speaking, in a 3-4, I move him to outside linebacker as depth there, but he does play well at the DN spot as well. So I certainly recommend you guys look out for Sharif Finch. As a young guy that's only a 68 overall, you can turn him into a very good player. So had to add him in as one of the final players on this list. Hopefully this helps you guys out in some way. Like I said, it is a little bit weird that I had to divide this up into 2 different videos, but I think it's going to be more effective that way for you guys, so you're not sitting here, trying to decipher who's a 3-4 and who's a 4-3 defensive end. I put in that work for you guys, looking at their traits and whatnot to help you guys out and make it easy for you. So those are my 3-4 defensive end hidden gems. I think the video that most people are going to be waiting for is the 4-3 defensive ends, because, you know, I feel like a lot of guys just run 4-3. So stay tuned for that. That'll be the next video. Make sure you guys drop a like on the video. Comment down below anything you guys like to see next. And if there are any other hidden gems that you guys specifically want to point out there for people to go out and check out, leave that in the comment section as well. I know you guys have been doing that in the past, and so I figured that's something that's good to address, that you guys continue to do that, because I like that you guys leave your suggestions in the comment section. Subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Hope you guys have a good night. See ya.